My name is Clara, and I am 78 years old. My life was spent building a safe harbor for others. I was a social worker, a quiet expert on history and complicated family paperwork. I thought I understood the shape of human cruelty, but I didn't understand the level of malice that lay waiting right inside my family. The worst day of my life came when I lost my son, David. The grief was immense, a physical weight that pressed down on my chest. But the betrayal was even heavier. My daughter-in-law, Vivian, didn't even pretend to mourn. She saw only the sizable family estate, the beautiful house, the pooled savings, the piece of ancestral land, all of which were meant for my quiet retirement and my grandchildren. She saw the estate, and she saw me, an elderly widow struggling with sudden loss, as the only thing standing between her and immense, undeserved wealth. Vivian didn't attack my late son's will, which was straightforward. She attacked me. She hired a cold, expensive legal team and filed a petition that stunned me into a freezing, silent panic. She argued that, due to an error found in an obscure county record, my marriage to my late husband, Robert, 40 years ago, was never fully legal. She claimed that due to a technical flaw, a missing required signature on a dusty state form, I was never officially Robert's wife in the eyes of the law. 40 years of shared life, of love, of building a home, wiped out by a single technical lie. If she won, I had no legal claim to the estate. Everything would pass directly to David's widow, Vivian. She looked at me in the lawyer's office, her face a mask of false concern, her eyes sharp and cold with calculation. "Clara," she stated, her voice utterly devoid of warmth, "your memory is fading. You are an old woman clinging to a life that legally never existed." She even brought up my recent hip surgery, claiming the medication had compromised my ability to recall simple facts. That was the line that destroyed my composure. She attacked my memory, my history, and my very identity. The injustice felt like a physical blow to my wounded hip. She thought she had found a flaw so old and so complicated that I would simply be too weak, too old, and too grieved to fix it. She didn't realize that by challenging the validity of my past, she had activated every single defensive and investigative skill I had spent my life perfecting. I realized I would have to become a historical detective, reliving every year of my life and racing against the closing doors of the legal system to save my own history and protect my husband's legacy. Vivian's claim was a massive psychological weapon designed to destroy my confidence. The weeks following the lawyer's meeting were spent submerged in the doubt she had so cleverly engineered. I felt the physical exhaustion of my body combined with the mental drain of trying to remember the precise details of a day that was 4 decades in the past. But the social worker in me, the disciplined, record-keeping part of my mind that always looks for the structural failure behind the human crisis, knew one essential truth. Behind every technical legal flaw is often a simple human error, not malicious intent. My only mission was to prove that the error was bureaucratic, not criminal. My first move was securing the foundational paperwork. I couldn't just trust the convenient new digital records. They only held the flaw, the missing signature. The true solution lay in the original paper archives, the dusty, forgotten basement Vivian hoped I was too old and frail to penetrate. I drove to the old courthouse, a massive gray building that smelled of damp stone and forgotten secrets. I spent days wearing a cheap surgical mask against the heavy, acrid smell of mold and decades of decaying paper. The space was cold, vast, and silent. I was sifting through brittle microfiche and massive hand-bound ledgers that required immense physical effort to lift and turn. My eyes burned, my hip ached constantly, but my resolve hardened with every page I turned. I searched through ledgers dating back to the 1970s, pulling each enormous book toward me across the rough wooden table. I finally located the original filing ledger from the county clerk's office, dated 1985. My heart was in my throat when I found the page from my merit certificate. The section for the official record was missing the Justice of the Peace's signature, confirming Vivian's claim, and I felt a wave of crushing despair. The legal grounds were real. But as I prepared to close the heavy ledger, my strength failing, my hand shaking, I noticed it. A tiny, faint, almost erased handwritten note scribbled in pencil in the margin written by the clerk in 1985. JP was ill. Used placeholder. JP meant Justice of the Peace. This small, pencil-written detail was a jolt of pure energy. It proved the error was bureaucratic. The clerk had noted that a placeholder was used because the JP was sick or absent. It wasn't my fault, but it still meant the marriage was technically invalid. I had the reason for the error, but I needed the original witness or the JP himself to fix it. My search for Walter T. Jennings, the original Justice of the Peace, began immediately. The legal clock was still ticking, but now I had a specific human target who could confirm the truth. Finding Walter T. Jennings, the original Justice of the Peace, was an exhaustive, draining process that consumed all my available time. I used my background in social work and genealogy, spending hours tracing old county directories, searching retired government employee records, and contacting historical societies. I even consulted old high school yearbooks, trying to find a link. After weeks of silent, frantic searching, I finally located him. Walter T. Jennings, 98 years old, now residing in a distant small retirement home near the coast. I felt a surge of pure hope, my first living lead after weeks of dusty, dead paper trails. While tracking Walter, I also contacted Martha and Arthur, the two witnesses named on my partial wedding forms. Martha, sadly, had severe memory issues, confusing me with her own daughter, and Arthur had passed away 10 years prior. The trail for the original legal witnesses was completely cold. I realized I had lost valuable time searching for people who could not help. Vivian's legal team was now using the confirmed void merit certificate as absolute proof that I was only a life companion. The formal court hearing was scheduled in 3 months, and time was running out. I drove the 4-hour journey to the retirement home to see Walter. The ride was lonely, filled with anxiety. Walter's voice was frail, his hand unsteady, but he was kind. He showed me the old ledger entry and the note, JP was ill. Walter remembered the date instantly, his eyes growing soft with the distant memory. He was deep and apologetic, but he delivered devastating news. Clara, I'm sorry. I signed the forms late, but state law was very specific then. If the JP didn't sign within 48 hours, the certificate was null and void. Walter confirmed the technical error was a fatal flaw under the old regulations, and he could not legally fix it now. Another dead end. The weight of the world felt crushing. I left the retirement home heartbroken. My memory was correct, my intent was real, but the law was against me. As I drove back, I refused to surrender. I decided to use my ultimate skill as a historical detective. I reasoned that if the law created the problem, the law must have created the exception. I spent the next weeks immersed in the state legislative archives,
not looking at current law, but the dusty, forgotten law of 1985 and 1986. I read hundreds of old, bound, dusty legislative journals searching for one tiny, saving clause. Just when my eyes were blurry and ready to quit, I found it. It was an obscure administrative edict passed in 1986, 1 year after my wedding, designed specifically to clean up marriage certificate errors caused by retiring JPs. This edict was the key.
The obscure administrative edict was my lifeline, but it came with very strict, detailed conditions. It stated that any marriage certificate voided due to the JP's failure to sign within 48 hours could be retroactively validated if two things were proven. 1. Genuine marital intent, easy to prove with 40 years of marriage. 2. Proof of a single formal public ceremony or declaration, documented by an active religious or civic organization in that calendar year. This shifted the entire focus of the case. Vivian and her lawyers were attacking a faulty signature. I was preparing to validate the sanctity of my public life. I realized the evidence wasn't about the signature. It was about the proof of public ceremony. I looked through old photo albums, fuzzy, yellowed pictures of our small garden ceremony. Photos, however, were not legal proof. I needed the institution. Our ceremony was held in the garden of a small, beautiful community church that had closed its doors 20 years ago. The records were likely scattered or destroyed. I tracked down the Church Historical Society, which, fortunately, had archived its old records in a remote, rural county library, the last place Vivian's high-paid urban lawyers would ever think to look. I drove the 6 hours immediately, driven by a renewed sense of purpose. The old records librarian, seeing my dedication and the age of the records, was patient and agreed to help. We searched through massive, dusty ledgers of the church's formal event bookings from 1985. My hip ached from hours of standing, but I couldn't stop. After hours of searching, we found it. May 12, 1985, Brooks Johnson Wedding and Reception. Officiant, Reverend David. The date, the names, the location, the simple entry signed and dated in the dusty church ledger was irrefutable legal evidence of the public ceremony required by the obscure administrative edict. I had the proof of public ceremony. Now I needed the final physical elements to file with the court. The formal sworn affirmation from the officiant to legally complete the final validation. I had to find Reverend David. Finding Reverend David was the last major physical hurdle in my decades-long detective work. I tracked him down to a nursing home, not the same one as the JP, but a different facility near the coast. He was 90 years old, kind, and immediately remembered the small church and the garden wedding. He was eager to help, viewing it as a final act of service. The formal court hearing was scheduled in just a few weeks. I knew I couldn't delay. When I presented the affidavit for him to sign, my heart sank completely. His hand shook severely due to advanced Parkinson's disease. The signature he managed to produce was illegible, unsuitable for a formal legal document intended to undo a 40-year-old error. I had found the law, the ledger, and the man, only to be stopped by the fragility of age itself. The irony was devastating. Vivian, completely unaware of my physical and historical detective work, filed an arrogant motion with the court, claiming my delay in response was proof of my legal incompetence and demanding a ruling. This was the final psychological attack designed to break my spirit. I called Miss Hayes, my trusted lawyer. I explained the heartbreaking situation, the Reverend's willingness, and the unsuitability of his signature. Ms. Hayes suggested a final, unconventional, but legally defensible move. We wouldn't ask the Reverend to sign the document with a pen. We would use his thumbprint. We would have the nursing home staff witness him affixing his thumbprint to a document verifying the church registry entry from 1985, explicitly referencing the obscure administrative edict. This was the final, unassailable physical evidence we needed, a simple, primary form of identification that even the court could not dismiss. We prepared the thumbprint affidavit meticulously. I printed the document on heavy, formal paper, ensuring it looked serious and official. Reverend David was happy to help, viewing it as his final, most important duty.
With 2 senior nurses formally witnessing him, he carefully pressed his thumbprint onto the document, legally confirming my public marriage ceremony from 40 years ago. I left the nursing home holding the final piece of evidence to nullify Vivian's attack, the thumbprint of a kind man officially proving the legality of my marriage. With the thumbprint affidavit and the church ledger entry now in hand, Ms. Hayes filed the motion for retroactive validation of my marriage certificate with the state court. This was the ultimate legal move, asking the highest court to reach back across 4 decades and fix a single, forgotten, bureaucratic error. Vivian's lawyers were furious and immediately tried every legal trick to block the motion, claiming the thumbprint was unreliable and the 1986 edict was irrelevant. Ms. Hayes remained firm. She countered their aggressive moves by highlighting Vivian's malicious intent to exploit a known bureaucratic flaw. I decided to increase the psychological pressure one last time before the hearing. I called Vivian directly, the one time I broke the legal silence. I calmly told her, "Vivian, I have the final documents. You're fighting a lie that died 40 years ago. You should stop now." I didn't tell her about the thumbprint. I just needed her to panic and lose sleep. Vivian, terrified that I had found some hidden evidence, spent days and nights researching the 1986 edict and trying to disprove the church registry. She failed completely. She couldn't attack the law itself. The court, recognizing the validity of the evidence and the maliciousness of Vivian's challenge, scheduled an immediate hearing to address the validity of the retroactive validation of my marriage certificate. My entire history, my 40 years with Robert, was about to be officially restored by a judge. The legal fight was reaching its climax, and I had successfully turned the tables using my own historical persistence.
The final court hearing was the biggest stage of my life. The courtroom was packed. Vivian's lawyer opened by viciously attacking my memory, painting me as a confused old woman whose claims were based on wishful thinking and unreliable memory of a long-past wedding day. He argued that the old documents were too flimsy to support a major estate claim. When it was my turn, Miss Hayes was brilliant. She led with the original flaw that Vivian discovered. Miss Hayes praised Vivian's legal team for their meticulous research in finding the 1985 missing signature. She then calmly stated that Vivian's team had failed to read the entire archived law and that their client was deliberately exploiting a known bureaucratic error for financial gain. Miss Hayes then presented the 1985 ledger entry, "JP was ill," used placeholder, and the 1986 obscure administrative edict, showing the court that the state itself had created the legal mechanism to fix this exact type of error. The court was stunned into silence. The flaw wasn't mine, it was a known bureaucratic mistake the state had formally corrected. This destroyed Vivian's entire case foundation. Finally, Miss Hayes presented the church registry entry and the Reverend's thumbprint affidavit. She explained the emotional and physical lengths I had gone to, driving 6 hours, finding the retired officiant, and using an unconventional thumbprint to prove the validity of a marriage that Vivian had maliciously attempted to erase. Vivian's face drained of color. Her entire case, built on the single missing signature, dissolved before her eyes. The judge paused for a long, heavy moment. He looked at the evidence, the archived ledger, the 1986 law, the thumbprint affidavit. He then looked directly at Vivian, whose composure had completely broken. He ruled immediately. He praised my meticulous investigation and ruled that the marriage was retroactively valid as of 1985. Vivian's legal claim to the estate was instantly nullified. She had challenged my identity and lost completely. Vivian was ruined. She had spent a fortune on legal fees fighting a truth she could never defeat. The judge ordered her to pay my legal costs, recognizing the malice in her challenge. She looked at me, not with anger, but with profound final defeat, realizing I had engineered her downfall using history and patience. I walked out of the courtroom with my head held high. I had proven that 40 years of love and persistence created a foundation stronger than any legal attack. My memory was sharp, my mind was clear, and my identity was restored.
The legal paperwork that followed was immense, but I insisted on handling all the filings and final documents myself. I felt a duty to finalize the paperwork after spending months tracking every single detail. I ensured the estate was settled exactly as Robert, my late husband, would have wanted, securing the inheritance for the grandchildren. Vivian disappeared immediately, unable to face the consequences of her malicious fraud and the massive legal bills. She had lost the inheritance, she was forced to pay my fees, and her public shame among the legal community was complete. I realized the entire ordeal, the anxiety, the research, the pain of the betrayal, had been worth it. I had spent 40 years of my life building a life with Robert. Vivian tried to erase that with one piece of paper. I simply proved that our marriage was not just a signature, it was a public, loving declaration documented in the history of the town itself. The case was closed, my identity was secured, and the legal battles were over. I drove out to the lakefront land that Robert had secretly intended for the grandchildren. It was beautiful and peaceful, just as he had promised. I brought the documents with me, the original church registry entry and the newly validated marriage certificate. I stood on the land, feeling the sun on my face. I pulled out the original void certificate that Vivian had attempted to use against me. I held the brittle, flawed paper in my hands, remembering the fear it had caused. Then, with a slow, deliberate strength, I tore it up into small pieces and let the wind carry them away, symbolizing the final, complete destruction of her lie. I then took the newly validated certificate, my proof of history, and secured it in a private safe deposit box. I visited Reverend David one last time, thanking him for his final act of kindness. He was quiet, but he smiled. I looked back at the incident and realized that Vivian's cruelty, forcing me to track down every detail of my past, was actually a strange form of gift. She forced me to legally validate my entire life, protecting my identity and my children's inheritance forever. My memory, my historical skill, and my love were stronger than any legal trick.